Good morning. It's Sunday, December 12. We are continuing to reflect on the amazing story of Ruth. And we're doing that as we prepare for the celebration of Christmas. In this season of Advent, we are reminded of how the world is so often a place of brokenness and discouragement, pain and loss, and the story of Ruth certainly acknowledges all of that, as we have seen, with Naomi experiencing the loss of her husband, her sons. Ruth also experienced the loss of a husband, one of Naomi's sons. And as they journey back to Bethlehem, as we have seen, they are broken people. They are on a road that goes to a place that, frankly, they don't know. Even though Bethlehem was recognized and familiar to Naomi, it was still a very strange and unfamiliar season of life that these women find themselves in. And as we find ourselves in this time of year on a journey of sorts towards the celebration of Christmas, towards Bethlehem, where Christ was born, we also acknowledge the reality of suffering and brokenness in our own lives. And yet this story of Ruth has so much to tell us and to assure us about God's faithfulness and how the road we are on, no matter how hard it may be, is a road where God Himself is present, where God Himself is in fact far ahead of us, preparing situations for us and tenderly caring for us despite all of the uncertainty of our lives. And so I'm going to read from Ruth chapter 3 today. It's in many ways a turning point in the story of Ruth. It's an incredible story that talks about how Ruth and Boaz, whom we have met in chapter 2, experience a relationship of sorts that begins and holds incredible promise for the rest of the story. So let's hear Ruth chapter 3. One day, Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been with, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. Although it is true that I am a near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "Don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then he went back into town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." What an incredible story. And as I have mentioned in last week's message, Boaz is an incredibly virtuous and noble individual, and he lives up to that reputation here in the 3rd chapter of Ruth as well. He is a man of integrity who cares for vulnerable people. We saw that last week as Boaz carried out the commands of God with respect to leaving parts of his field unharvested so that food would be provided for those who were vulnerable, who were hungry. Remember, the story of Ruth takes place during the time of the Judges, when everybody did what was right in his own eyes. That's the recurring theme of the story of Judges. But Boaz was somebody who did something right in God's eyes, many things right, in fact. He is somebody who stands out in this time of difficulty, time of unfaithfulness, a time of just moral situations that were not right. He stands out as a virtuous follower of God. And we see that here in chapter 3. And we see how the story of Ruth begins to hold out increasing hope for Ruth and Naomi. They come to Bethlehem empty, destitute, lost. And as the story progresses, even here in this chapter, we can see that there's hope for these women. There's the promise not only of food, but of family, of stability, of love. And we see all of this in this incredible story that takes place in Bethlehem. So significant because, again, as we prepare for the celebration of Christmas, we are reminded of how central the little town of Bethlehem is still for us today as the birthplace of Jesus, who gives us stability, who is the ultimate sign of God's love, care, and grace. The relationship between Ruth and Boaz anticipates the relationship that we have with Jesus Christ. And so, as Ruth and Naomi arrive, just as the barley harvest is beginning to be gathered in, there's promise, and we see that promise become a greater reality here in this 3rd chapter of the story. And again, God is not obviously present in this chapter. There's no theophany, no direct revelation of God. God does not speak, and yet he is so evident in the story, so active behind the scenes, arranging things, caring for his people. Boaz is certainly one of the major players in this drama, and his role conveys the love and faithfulness of God. But don't overlook the fact that Naomi is also becoming a stronger character in this story. You know, one thing that makes any story or play or movie strong and appealing is character development. We don't like reading books or watching movies where characters are flat, where there's no growth, where they just remain the same throughout the course of the book or the film. We want them to grow. We want them to be transformed by their experiences. And look at how Naomi is growing and being transformed in this short book of Ruth. The old and bitter woman of chapter 1, the one who was convinced her life was over, the one who had become so hardened by all her suffering, is suddenly coming alive in her old age. She's being transformed. Chapter 3 brims with Naomi's excitement. She suddenly has something to live for. She's no longer the bitter old person whose life has no purpose, who basically went back to Bethlehem, probably presuming that she would die there. Since Boaz has entered the story, Naomi's story has a whole new meaning. Ruth has a future, and so does she. The woman who believed that she had no family left, who initially insisted that Ruth and Orpah go back to Moab, suddenly has family here. There's a kinsman redeemer. And she even refers to Ruth tenderly as my daughter. Very familial. Not just a daughter-in-law, but stronger than that. There's a bond between them, just as Ruth spoke about when she said she would promise to be with Naomi and never to leave her. It's a reference to family spoken by someone who was previously convinced she had no family. So Naomi has a plan. The woman who once felt locked in a prison of despair is now set free. Hope does that to people. Hope releases us from whatever bondage we may feel we are in. Hope liberates us. It expands our horizons. It shatters the confines of what we previously believed would limit all our possibilities. Hope gives us purpose for living, and we certainly see how Naomi experiences that in this 3rd chapter. You can sense her excitement as you read these verses. Naomi is alive again. She has a plan. She's not just a minor character in the story. She represents an important role as she carries the plot line of the story of Ruth along. Now, it's a really incredible story that Naomi dreams up here. It's one that involves significant risk and danger, far more than we realize. The threshing floor, where much of the action takes place in this 3rd chapter, is where everything Naomi hopes will take place and actually does. Threshing floors were very dangerous places in this original context of the story of Ruth, especially at night, and especially for a woman. There was danger everywhere. Since the harvest had just been gathered, harvesters and the owners of the fields would sleep there at night. They would do that to protect their harvest, to make sure that it wasn't stolen. And since it was harvest season, there was a lot of celebration and frivolity at the threshing floor, lots of happiness and joy. Naomi refers to the fact that Boaz would be eating and drinking there. And Boaz, we read, was in good spirits. And we understand probably what that meant. Add to all of this the fact that the women of the culture of that time in the towns, women of questionable character, you might say, were commonly found around threshing floors. And if you think about that, with all of the celebration, the drinking, the presence of women and men in a time of harvesting, celebration, you can understand why this would be a dangerous place for Naomi to send Ruth. One can only surmise that the only reason Naomi wanted Ruth to be there was because she trusted Boaz. She knew that he was a man of good, strong character, a reputable person who would protect Ruth, as he had already previously done. So Naomi's trust in Boaz's character is the only way that Naomi would have even ever thought to give this instruction that she gives to Ruth. It's really a strange and risky plan when you think about it. I mean, picture in your mind Naomi giving Ruth these very specific instructions. Listen, Ruth, I want you to go down to the threshing floor tonight. First, take a nice bath, put on lots of perfume. Don't let anyone see you there. Just wait until Boaz has had a few drinks and watch where he lies down for the night. Once you know where he's sleeping, go lie down beside him. Start taking his clothes off and wait for him to wake up. He'll tell you what to do next. I mean, this is basically what Naomi is telling Ruth to do. I mean, what kind of a plan is this? What parent would ever instruct his or her daughter to do such a thing? Amazingly, Ruth says, I will do whatever you say, as if it were completely innocent and safe. Again, the only reason Naomi had this plan and Ruth agreed to it was because of Boaz, their understanding of the kind of person he was. And again, we see how God is at work here. God is at work in the lives of faithful people, godly people. People carry the providential love of God forward, and that is as true for us today as it was true in the story of Boaz and Ruth. The story of God's providence continues to be written today in the lives of people like you and me, who are honest and faithful, people who protect vulnerable individuals, who extend the love and care of God to everyone. We see wonderfully in this chapter that Ruth and Boaz belong to each other. They are both people of noble character. And it's almost like a love story. It's almost like the kind of Hallmark movies that we see, especially at this time of year, where people who are meant to be together end up together. It's predictable, and yet it's so appealing. It's so lovely to see and to celebrate. We want Ruth and Boaz to get married. And the beginning of that hope is here in chapter 3. Now, I mentioned last week that you should remember how the wings of God that were referred to in the second chapter of Ruth would fly back into the story. Well, here in chapter 3, we see where these wings land. Boaz in chapter 2 referred to the wings of God that Ruth found shelter under. And it's interesting that when Ruth tells Boaz to spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer, the Hebrew word that's translated as corner is the same word Boaz used when he referred to the wings of God. Ruth is literally telling Boaz to spread your wings over me. Is she asking Boaz to just cover her up because it's cold? She needs a blanket to stay warm, even a little corner of the blanket? Or is she referring back to those words of Boaz and almost holding him accountable for the benediction that he gave back in chapter 2, where he blessed Ruth and referred to the wings of God that would cover her? Is Ruth basically saying, Boaz, you're going to live out that benediction yourself by spreading the wings of your garment over me. You will, in fact, be the wings of God for me. What she is basically saying as she names him as a kinsman redeemer is this: Boaz, you need to take me as your wife. You need to cover me. You need to protect me. You need to claim me as the kinsman redeemer. Now, this is the incredible thing about this story, how it makes a dramatic shift, one that makes us sit on the edge of our seat and wonder just what might happen. There's a kinsman redeemer. Again, this is marvelous because earlier in the story, we had no idea that Naomi had any family other than Ruth, who accompanied her. But there's another family member. In fact, we find out in chapter 3 that there are two of them, Boaz and another individual who is closer to the family of Elimelech than Boaz is. So he has the first option of redeeming Ruth, claiming the land that belonged to them. Again, another incredible surprise. Naomi actually has property that this kinsman redeemer can redeem. So Boaz is given an opportunity to fulfill his responsibility as the kinsman redeemer, recognizing that there's somebody else who also has that responsibility, has the first opportunity to fulfill that responsibility as the kinsman redeemer. This was something that would involve significant risk, and I'll get into that more fully next week in the message on Ruth chapter 4. But Boaz expresses interest in fulfilling that role as a kinsman redeemer. And I'll say a little bit more about that next week, what that role involves. But just know that for now, what that meant was risk. What that meant was Boaz would be willing to protect someone like Ruth, to take her as she was, as his wife, to become vulnerable himself in all of this. This is the power of love, the risk of love, the willingness to suffer for love, to sacrifice for love, to defer to the needs and priorities of someone else instead of focusing on your own. And again, we can see how this really anticipates the story of how we are in a relationship with Jesus Christ, our kinsman redeemer, one like us, a family member, a human being, but also a redeemer who shares not just our humanity, but the divinity of God. In a relationship with him, we see the power of love more fully and most beautifully. And so the power of love that we see here in this chapter, with Ruth and Boaz having the prospect of getting together, is celebrated especially in the relationship that we have with Jesus Christ and the power of his love, who also lived in Bethlehem and makes an enormous difference in our lives. I'll share more with you about that in next week's video. Thank you so much for watching. Be well and be blessed.
How did it go?
Yeah, it was okay.
You sure you got it all in?
Yeah, I'm quite sure I got it all in. It was before 20.